This episode is sponsored by Furniture Box. Check them out in the description below.
A lot of people have asked, like, what made you successful?
We've got Alexandra Rico-Lloyd, the founder of the Bike Club.
That's kind of the journey that a true cyclist takes. Dropped out of school at 17. I set up a website while sat on my parents' sofa. I set it up with my boyfriend at the time, turned husband, and now we're getting divorced.
What would you say has been the hardest moment so far?
Remortgaged the flat, took out credit cards, loans. I had nothing.
What was the turning point?
I had to succeed.
What was it like working for Boris Johnson?
He did ask me to get into a swimming pool once.
Forbes 30 under 30. How did that come about?
We don't pay for it, by the way. We took inspiration from Brewdog. I have a lot of insecurities. I'd have panic attacks on the tube.
What kept you going?
I don't think I fitted the idea of what a founder should be.
Can you give any specific advice to females who are looking to raise money at the moment?
You have to deal with.
Guys, welcome to The Ground Floor, the podcast where we ask successful people exactly how they did it. Our guest today is very relaxed at the moment. We've got...
Can't you tell?
We've got Alexandra Rico-Lloyd, the founder of the Bike Club, which is a monthly kids bike subscription service. Now, I don't want to make you even more uncomfortable because she was a little bit nervous before the interview, but you have quite an impressive list of accolades here, so I'm going to have to just read them because there were so many that I couldn't memorize them. So you've been named on the Forbes 30
If you could
under
just look
30.
directly into the camera now,
Yeah,
that would be
exactly.
fantastic as we do it.
About 60 centimetres
Yeah,
away.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Alex has been named on the Forbes 30 under 30 Europe list for retail and e-commerce. She's one of the top 100 women in cycling by Cycling UK. She's a top 50 female founders to watch by Bohurst, and she's also a female leader and game changer by women in fintech. That is a pretty impressive list of accolades.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
No worries. Thank you for being here in this very relaxed environment. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's nice and sunny outside. Not that you can tell in this dark room.
Dark, well-lit room.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a sell for the podcast. If ever we needed it, we'll clip that up
Dark,
straight away.
very expensively lit room. So, look, for people that might not know you or might not know Bike Club, can you give a little summary of what the Bike Club is and how you got started with it?
Yeah, so as you said, the Bike Club does subscription kids bikes, which you exchange as they grow. So for a parent, it's quite expensive to go out there and buy a kid's bike. I'm not sure if you have kids, but it's about like £300 to £500 a bike to start out with, and that's quite like a big outlay, especially if you've got multiple children. And so instead of going out buying a bike, letting it rust in the garage, you can subscribe to Bike Club. We will send you a bike for between £5 and £15 a month, and then when they grow out of it, we simply send you a new one and take back the old one. Now, from our perspective, we then have a whole team of mechanics who refurbish it completely and get it out to a new family. So that's Bike Club. That's what we do. In terms of how I got into it or what I was doing before, well, I dropped out of school at 17, so I didn't go to university or get a degree.
That makes three of us.
Can I ask what the reason behind that was? I'm interested.
I
feel like there's a story there.
Sounds incriminating now.
I was going to say, yeah.
That was three
off the
hours.
record.
Yeah.
Off the record.
I robbed a bank.
So firstly, I don't think academics are really for me. I was working part-time. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time. My friends were older than me, and then I had a massive falling out with my friends. Okay. That I did have at school, and I just decided I wanted to get started. I didn't want to go to university and be surrounded by petty playground gossip anymore.
Fair enough. I can completely understand that.
Yeah, I think we can both relate.
Very relate to that, yeah.
So you dropped out at 17, and then what?
I did an internship at City Hall, so I worked for Boris Johnson at the time, he was mayor, doing IT. So people would call and say the computer wasn't working, and I would tell them to switch off and on again.
Good. I think that is head of IT right there, so I can see that.
Have you watched the IT Crowd?
Yeah, of course, like
Great.
on repeat.
Yeah, good. Just checking. We're on the same page. Okay, cool. I have to ask about that. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, what was it like working for Boris Johnson? This is going to be such a funny interview.
I know, but we can't go too far. So,
He did ask me to get into a swimming pool once.
Did he actually?
Did he? Wow. Okay.
Boris Johnson asked
That's
you.
Interesting.
Boris Johnson asked you to get into a swimming pool.
No, well, he didn't ask me. He invited me, and I think it was all completely innocent. I was at his house doing some work, and he invited me into his swimming pool.
It sounds innocent.
He was in his swimming trunks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as I say, it sounds innocent because I mean, whenever I'm talking to people, I'm not in swimming trunks.
Yeah.
So,
I'm like, do you want to pop in?
Yeah, do you want
And the meeting would go far better if we were both in our undergarments and we were both wet in a pool.
Oh my god. Yeah. Good. Okay, so you did a brief stint with Boris Johnson then. It's interesting.
No, not in that way.
Not in that way.
Just to clarify.
Not in that way.
Aside from our aquatic endeavours, she was very professional.
And then what were you doing after that? Where did that lead?
I continued in IT, but I worked for a kind of solar company for a very brief period of time. I'd already set Bike Club up by that point.
So how old were you when you set Bike Club up then?
Oh God, like 20, 21, maybe more 20. I don't know.
Yeah. And what was the sort of the inception of it?
So I set it up with my I set it up with my boyfriend at the time, turned husband, and now we're getting divorced.
Okay. Right.
So that was a bit of a whirlwind. We were both really keen cyclists, and so it does actually stem from a love of cycling. But then also he's one of those people that really wants to set up their own business.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've met some of them.
Yeah.
So he was always kind of thinking of ideas, and the initial idea was adult bikes, where a bit like me, I had started off on a kind of cheapo road bike. I was cycling 50 kilometers a day. Commuting. So quite a lot.
Yeah.
And then he kind of got me into road cycling and upgrading my bike, and my bikes just kept getting more expensive. And that's kind of the journey that a true cyclist takes. So that was the initial idea, to be able to enable adults to do that, but subscribe into bikes instead. And then we landed on kids' bikes because actually they have an inherent need. There's much more demand for kids' bikes that kind of swap and change the whole time.
No, that makes sense. So what was the process then of actually sort of setting up that initial business, targeting adults? I'm curious to know how you actually go about starting that.
Yeah, so we never started it.
Okay.
That was just the kind of thought process that we went
I'm
across,
with you.
and how we ended up on
and
an
then you kind
idea.
of pivoted before you launched into
Basically
kids.
pivoted before we even did anything.
Okay.
So what I'm curious about is getting the actual kind of practicality set up. How does it go? I mean, do you just sort of have to then buy 10 bikes up front and then just wait and then build a website, or did you was there any development required?
I mean, that's basically what we did. So yeah, we bought 10 kids bikes, exactly that. In different sizes, because you kind of needed to bulk buy to get a contract with suppliers anyway. So we bought a load of 10, kept them in our 2-bed flat in Balham. Then I set up a website while sat on my parents' sofa and put it out to the world. And we got some, and also some like Facebook ads and like Google ads to get some traffic incoming. And our first order was from Scotland.
Okay.
Wow.
Interesting.
And so when you first get the 10 bikes, I'm guessing you're buying them new.
Yes.
Very new. And then how did you already have like a network of like engineers? I mean, obviously you said you were a keen cyclist and you're in that community. Did you have like a network of people that you were like, okay, I've got a system if something breaks? And is that a thing where if something breaks, it's their responsibility? How does that work in terms of like liability?
No, if something breaks, we're responsible for it, right? Like if it's a manufacturing fault, for example, that hardly ever happens. If it kind of, I don't know, if the chain comes off whilst they're cycling, well, that's normal maintenance.
Yeah.
That's kind of on them. And then because the bikes come back to us on average, kind of every 12 to 15 months, then we refurbish it. It goes through a full service.
Got you.
And that kind of keeps it very, very up to date. At the start, no, we did not have mechanics. That was me and him every evening, every morning, putting together bikes, because they don't come built either. You kind of have to put them all together and do a pre-delivery inspection.
Yeah.
And right at the beginning, we were doing that, even though we're not trained mechanics.
Right.
So how did you get your first customers, essentially? I mean, you mentioned obviously you built a website, you were doing Google ads and sort of SEO and sort of pay per click and Facebook ads. But outside of that, I mean, this is the kind of thing I would have thought. We had Hewitt Van Bockel on, founder of Tenzing, who was talking quite heavily about actually attracting a community and building in that community and being part of that. I assume this seems like a logical place to start with that sort of industry, because it's so kind of, I suppose, pertinent to cyclists.
Yeah, right. So you go after your early adopters, right?
Yeah.
And our early adopters were very active outdoor families who were probably cycling anyway, like mostly cycling anyway. And they understood the proposition, but they also got the sustainability element of it. And that's what I think motivated them to do it, because it made sense to them. Like they completely understood what we were trying to achieve. And that kind of kept us going for quite a while. And we were able to really target that sort of person through Facebook ads.
Yeah.
That landscape has changed a little bit now, thanks GDPR. But at the time we were able to even say this is the shops that we think they are shopping in, and we want to target them, and we want to target people who have children between the ages of X and X, and Facebook knows everything about you.
I remember that time.
And
golden age.
I know, amazing, right?
Yeah.
It was really good. And that was it for a long time. And then we kind of broaden out from that segment. As you grow, as you kind of get more of them, word of mouth kicks in, and then your whole like customer base looks a little bit different. But continually doing kind of segment analysis over who our customer is and who it might be in like a year's time.
I'm with you.
No,
go ahead.
I was going to say, with the cycling community, I'm just curious. Obviously, you've been a part of it for a long time. What would you say is the kind of, if you on a shot in the dark guess of what percentage of the cycling community is very big on sustainability and that kind of thing? Because that's probably quite a big factor, I'd imagine. But I don't know how much of it is people doing it for health and the kind of experience of it, and how much of it is people being like, trying to go green.
Or financially, actually.
All that.
Yeah.
Right. So I think when you say like cycling community, there's probably like different sections of the cycling community. So you've got your mammals.
You're talking to two people that don't cycle.
Yeah.
By the way. We should clarify.
You can see that in my eyes, right? I'm
exactly.
to what extent,
cycling
like,
community.
Okay.
There's
So
Bloods
have
and
you heard of
Crips,
a
there's,
mammal
like,
before?
A mammal?
Middle-aged man in lycra.
No,
but I've seen them in the wild.
You've seen them, exactly.
I've seen them in the wild. I've hated them in the wild. Yeah, yeah.
That's very sexist, because I also cycle in lycra, but whatever. I'm not middle aged and I'm not a man, but
so
whatever. That is like a term. You don't. There is no term.
Yeah, okay.
There is no term.
Yeah. Okay, just checking.
But yeah, so like you've got your mammals,
Yeah.
and then your face.
I just find this so funny. There's infighting. Like your first point was like, I don't want to go to uni. There was too much cliqueiness and too many things. It's like, okay, we got the mammals, we got the birds and the bee. Like, that's great.
It's like the film Mean Girls, really.
Yeah. I'm getting that kind of vibe at the moment.
The mammals don't associate with the
Exactly.
sharks.
And then you've got your independent bike shops.
Okay.
So like a lot of your bike shops on the high street will be independent bike shops. They're generally run by enthusiast cyclists.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that we realised that we offered to parents, is that walking into one of those shops and saying you want a kid's bike can be quite uncomfortable. A bit like walking into this room and having loads of cameras pointing at you.
Sure, yeah.
But it can be a bit uncomfortable because...
you don't have someone like us to make you feel really comfortable before the episode.
Which we're doing really
well.
I'm
sweating
right?
lots.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, sure. But like basically we realised that we were able to offer this space that parents felt comfortable coming to ask for advice for their kids, like sizing, how do I get them started? And because your local bike shop won't, the focus is not kids' bikes. Their focus is adult bikes, and that's
Yeah.
what they know really, really well.
That's where the money is, I'm guessing. Like at pro
Yeah,
level.
yeah.
Yeah.
But then, and that's where we were kind of able to come in and say, actually, we don't just offer a bike. There's a whole level of service that we offer as well. There's a massive space in family cycling that was just completely underserved. And I think a lot of people have asked, like, what made you successful? What made Bike Club successful? And I think a lot of it is right place, right time, good team, and I say right time, but we were possibly a bit early because...
What makes you think you're early?
Well, because subscriptions and circular economy have kind of really come about over the past few years. Back in 2016, no one knew what the circular economy was. And subscriptions were a thing, but everyone was still very cautious about signing up to things online. We offered direct debits only because there was a trust element. That was our way of gaining trust from the consumer, because they have a lot more control over a direct debit than a subscription. And so that's what makes me say that we were possibly a little bit early. And the only thing with being early is that if you're early, there's a lot of almost education that you need to do around like consumer habits, and you have to spend a lot more, I guess, on trying to convert people and trying to convince them that this is something that they should do and this is the future. But at the same time, I think it was the right time.
On that point of being early then, I mean, how did you go about getting a proof of concept and product market fit when you actually didn't have anybody else in that space doing something comparably to what you were looking to do?
Listen to the customer.
Okay.
Yeah, like, well, we call them members, but yeah, listen to feedback. And we were constantly changing things. So initially, people signed up. It was a contract, so they'd sign up for a minimum period of time, which, saying that now, is kind of silly because you don't know when a child's going to grow. And the whole point of what we were trying to do was to enable you to have a bike for your child that's the right size at any stage. And so we quickly scrapped that because we realised, one, we didn't really need it. That was a safety mechanism for us, but we worked around that. But also it was kind of off-putting for the customer. But yeah, there's loads of small things like that, small changes to our offering that we made along the way.
And so was it a case of, in the beginning when you bought the first 10, was that like just you and your, then boyfriend at the time, just basically having the bikes and storing them in your house?
Yeah.
And then as you scaled, I'm guessing, do you now have, warehouse and things like that?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit sort of to the scaling process?
Sure. So we used our flat as storage for too long. You could hardly walk in. It was that bad. Right. They were stacked high. Yeah. And then a friend wasn't using their garage, and we basically rented their garage from them for a period of time. That worked okay. That was a very cold winter though, and I was refurbishing a lot of bikes at the time. Out in the snow. Then we used a big yellow, so a storage unit, and then in like light industrial units, short leases, and then kind of upgraded as we kind of went along. Now I think we've got 3 or 4 sites throughout London.
Wow. How many bikes do you buy every month?
Oh, I don't know.
Do you have a rough idea?
No, no.
That's crazy.
She was going to guess and then thought,
yeah.
No, actually, no, I don't.
That's a lot of bikes.
How do you know when you're ready to buy a bike? I'm curious, because you say the lifetime of that bike is 12 to 18 months typically for the child to be using it before they grow out of it. Do you need to have a certain number of children to then request a bike of that sort of size for you to think, okay, maybe we can then buy that bike or buy a number of those bikes? Or how do you assess when you're ready to actually buy them? Because it's quite a large upfront cost for what is obviously quite a small monthly then subscription off the back of it.
If we need to grow, we need to grow. So we need to buy more bikes. It was always someone orders, we buy a bike. So at the beginning we had fairly long lead times. Now we're able to forecast our growth and buy X number of months in advance based on our forecast.
I'm with you. So when was the when were you ready to hire your sort of first employee?
Again, too late.
As everyone says when they come on, to be honest with you.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's quite common.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Yeah, so I quit my job in kind of March 2017. Went full time and then hired a member of staff September that year.
Okay.
So there was a few months of me doing it solo.
What was the first role that you hired for?
An operations executive, which means do absolutely anything
Yeah.
and everything. And he was great. He was out there in the snow refurbishing bikes with me. He came to work in our flats, which
Right.
was very odd,
Yeah.
but
Very startup-y.
yeah,
It is,
exactly,
yeah,
very
very
startup-y.
startup-y.
And then we had an intern that Christmas as well, who then came on full time after Christmas.
I'm curious to know how you knew you were ready to go full time in the business at that point. What was the turning point?
So we kind of set ourselves this number
Okay.
of bikes that we'd have, and then one of us would quit our job and go all in. And we kind of surpassed that number quite quickly, too quickly. And neither of us was quite ready. And we were still able to juggle everything. And so we continued for a couple of months, and then it just became like really clear that if we're going to do this, which we're going to at this point because we've invested too much money into
Yeah,
it,
of course.
someone's got to quit their job. And so, yeah, I quit and went all in.
I'm curious to know about, in terms of like the initial startup capital, was it just like you had the idea for 10 bikes and you had sort of just saved up for that? Were there other things you needed to kind of accommodate for?
So my husband or boyfriend at the time had just got some money from a family relative that had died. So he had a bit of inheritance, and he used that money, remortgaged the flat,
Oh wow.
took out credit cards, loans,
Wow.
literally everything we could get our hands on a kind of personal basis. And then we took inspiration from Brewdog, and we offered bicycle bonds to friends and family and to our members at the time. And they invested some money, which some of them converted later on.
Yeah.
And then we raised our seed round. So we launched 2016, and we raised our seed round late 2018, early 2019.
It sounds like you you at least put up quite a lot of money to start with. How did you allocate it?
Whatever we need to spend money on.
Okay. There wasn't
Bikes,
really
mainly.
there wasn't really
They sell bikes, Skeet,
yeah,
all right?
exactly. It's got lots of bikes. Okay, that's it. Was there a business plan in place at all at that point?
Yeah. So there was kind of almost a third co-founder, and so my husband and him worked on the business plan together. They're both trained accountants, trained at KPMG, and
helps.
yeah, exactly. So they knew exactly what they were doing. They built out a model and played around with it a lot and made sure it all kind of made sense on paper.
Yeah, because I was curious about how you go about pricing something like that in terms of like making it cost effective compared to the price of the bikes themselves.
Yeah, so at the beginning we put you have to guess like a lot, right? You just have to make loads of assumptions. So we assumed how long a bike would last us. We assumed how much delivery would be. We assumed how much it would cost us to refurbish it. We assumed how long it would live for and how long components would live for. And that all changes. But luckily our assumptions were pretty modest, actually.
What would you say has been the hardest moment so far?
Where do you begin? From the sounds of that.
Yeah.
So in the early days, it was really lonely when I was doing it by myself before bringing on a member of staff. It was just so lonely. And I wish I'd either hired someone earlier. Actually, no. I wish I'd gone into a co-working space earlier, because then you meet other founders. You actually kind of get into that network. I came from a very different background to my co-founder. He was privately educated. He had friends whose parents ran businesses, were entrepreneurs, and he had a network. I came from Southeast London, went to the local grammar school, and my dad is a policeman and my mum works for the local council. So I had, in terms of that kind of founder entrepreneur network in London, I had nothing, and it was just very lonely. Now there's a lot of communities out there. I really encourage people to try and join networks or join a co-working space. The early days, the lonely days, and then I think the problems just change. So you then get to a point where you're no longer lonely because you've got a team of people doing stuff for you, and it's fantastic. But they're all your employees, and no one gets what you're going through as a founder. No one understands the level of capital, the level of like time, energy, emotion that you put into what you do. And then you bring on investors, and they're a different breed of people altogether, and you're kind of just trying to juggle everything and keep going. And people think that you love what you do, and I do. I loved it, but there are still those Sunday nights where I just dreaded going in, and I didn't want to go into the office. I couldn't do it anymore. I'd have panic attacks on the tube, and then I'd go in and I'd lead a team full of people, and I had no clue what I was doing. I was like 21, right? So it's difficult.
I'm curious to... Oh, go on.
Well, I was going to say, did you... going back to what you were saying about like your upbringing, especially compared to your co-founder, what was that like when you did step in rooms with the investors? Like you said, you mentioned they're a very particular type of people usually. Did you feel like that was a sort of quite an individual experience? And from your perspective, what was that like from your background? Did you feel like they sort of treated you any differently?
I'd like to think they didn't treat me differently because of my background. I'd like to think by that point that we were raising investment, I'd kind of proven myself. I think I felt the most different to them because I was female. I was the only female in the boardroom, for example, and especially when I had kids, I did feel very different to them. They were all accountants. And sometimes I felt that the conversation was completely useless and we could have done with a little bit more strategy as opposed to talking about depreciation rates. And there's quite a lot of like lingo that's thrown around that I just, oh God, if you go back through my notebooks now, there's so many like acronyms that I've scribbled down, like, what is this?
Google later.
And then like go home and Google it late at night, and I'm up until 4 a.m. just Googling all the stuff that I didn't know. And I also think it's kind of important to talk about that, because if you don't admit that you didn't know everything, and then other people just feel really bad about the fact, or they feel, I don't know, really stupid. They don't know what everyone else is talking about. So I've changed now, and I will just openly say, sorry, I really don't get what you mean. Can you explain it? Because I think it's okay to not know everything,
especially when you've already built a successful business, because it's even more of a case of like, I mean, it should be okay, I agree, it should be normalized at any level to just ask questions and be like, oh, I don't know what that is. But I think a lot of people do have that fear of, I don't want to look stupid, especially against investors, and they're going to think I'm
that's true. But I think what's interesting actually with what we've been doing is that a lot of the people that we've sat down with have said the same thing of, you figure it out as you go along.
I actually am sweating, by the way.
That's okay.
It's a TGF exclusive.
A lot of people have said the same thing. You kind of figure it out as you go, and you just trust your gut, and you don't really know what you're doing from day one. You just go with it, and you just pick it up and you learn. you know. So I think it is. I think it is normal, but it should be normalized and spoken about more, definitely.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a second to talk about our sponsor for this episode, Furniture Box. Furniture Box is an online furniture retailer that makes awesome products for everywhere from your bedroom to your office. Now, we actually had Monty and Dan, the co-founders, on our show. That's how we met. We loved their story and we hung out with them afterwards, and we knew that we wanted to work with them. And here's the thing. One of the biggest issues I have whenever I've ordered furniture in the past is that certain big name furniture companies, not naming any names, will charge you a fairly large fee for delivery, and even then that delivery usually takes a few days, if not longer. With Furniture Box, not only do they offer free next day delivery, but they're now planning on extending their delivery cutoff even more so that you can literally order a dining set as late as 8 p.m. and be eating dinner on it the next day. So to put it simply, there's no one in the UK furniture scene that's doing anything like what they're doing, and we're thrilled to have them as our sponsor. So click the link in the description and check them out. Now back to the episode.
How did you get through your toughest moments? It sounds like you've had some real low points. What kept you going?
I had nothing to lose and a lot to lose. I'd given up my career, and I felt that if I wasn't successful in the business, then that would be my career. Like how would I explain that to a future employer when I try to get another job? So I think I had to succeed in what I was doing, and I just kept going. I also had quite a lot going on personally. My family went through quite a tough time, and it was an escape for me. It was escapism to throw myself into work.
Just take your mind off other stuff almost.
Yeah.
I'm curious because we've interviewed a lot of different people with a lot of different founder setups, like people that have started businesses on their own, you know, with friends, with family, even with partners. But you're the first person we've interviewed that's going through the situation that you're going through, with where you had a relationship with a co-founder. That relationship is now changing the sort of status of what kind of relationship that is. Are you able to speak a little bit to that and what that experience is like? Because there's probably people that are going through a similar thing. You don't have to go into detail, but I think starting a business with a romantic partner and then that romantic relationship changing into a different kind of relationship, I think it's quite probably more common than people think.
Yeah, I think it's quite natural, and I speak to quite a lot of kind of husband and wife teams, and a lot of companies that we, buy from, we don't realise they're actually a husband and wife team. I think it's natural because if you're both passionate about something and if you're both quite different individuals, then you will have different things to bring to the table. And we definitely had that. We definitely didn't kind of step on each other's toes, especially at the beginning. We knew where his skill set lied and where my skill set lied, and they were very different things. So it makes sense. It's natural to kind of go on that path. For us in particular, we met when I was 19, and then kind of quickly started the business. And I think there possibly wasn't enough of a foundation in our relationship before we started the business. And so actually, kind of when you take the business away, there's not much of a personal relationship there anymore, because we were completely consumed by the business. And then also co-founder conflict is very common.
Sure.
And I speak to people, even if they're not going into business with their other half or with a family member, I do warn them that you're going to have some co-founder conflict. And it's, people talk about co-founder divorces when, just because going through that process of separating from your co-founder, even when they're not your partner,
it's a divorce in some respects.
Is a divorce. Yeah. Like, there's so many legal complexities to separating from a co-founder, like there are legal complexities when you're divorcing someone. And so it is quite common for co-founders to split up. And so I think there's that element. It's so difficult when you're when everything is kind of breaking around you and you're going through this roller coaster of emotions daily, to not have conflict with that co-founder.
Given the fact that it then intertwines two worlds, because obviously if you have an issue with the business, you don't necessarily get as much space from your partner because you're in both worlds together. If you could go back, would you still recommend people start a business with their romantic partner?
Yeah, because you can work all the hours. You never get a date. You never get a holiday.
Yeah,
that's a healthy reason.
But you can work all the hours, and you can speak with your co-founder 24/7. It's not healthy. But I think it's good for business, to an extent, to a point. I did set a rule I tried setting a rule that we were not to talk about work whilst I was in bed.
Yeah.
No, it didn't last.
Okay, fine.
I just needed my space.
Yeah.
Like you say, there's no escape.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just needed some space. And when you go into bed, you don't want to be thinking about work because then you'll be up all night.
Yeah. No, that's natural.
Hey, it never actually worked. That.
Do you think just the last thing on that? Do you think it's important, with whether it's with friends or with a partner or anything? Do you think it's important to have allocated time? Let's say, I mean, so Skeeth and I, we had an evening out like about a month ago, and we went to a nice little place and celebrated, the couple things. And at the beginning, I had a couple of things I wanted to run through, and I said, "Oh, I've got this thing, by the way. I think we should do that." And he was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Actually, let's not talk about business tonight. Let's just make it a night as friends and just hanging out." Do you think it's important to allocate set time, whether it's with your partner or your friend or whatever, if they are a co-founder and they are also a personal relationship?
Yeah, I actually heard. I can't remember which VC it is, but I heard that someone who got investment recently has been made to go, well, co-founders, they're not a couple, but they've been made to go for couples counselling every week.
Wow.
There's no problem, but it is purely to make sure that they have really good communication and that they have that time set aside with a third party to kind of go through any problems that might arise in the future. And I do think that's a really good idea in a way. I think another problem for us is that as the business grew and our roles became quite separated, we weren't really overlapping much. We didn't really understand what each other was going through because we were kind of going home and talking about stuff. We never sat down and had a one-to-one regularly. We never did that professionally. And I think that kind of almost added to the conflict because we didn't really know what each other was going through. And I think that's important. If you were to say to your manager that you haven't spoken to your direct report for 4 months on a one-to-one basis, they'd be like, what on earth are you doing? Go and set aside time, take them for lunch or something. That's not right. And maybe because you're co-founders or because you're a married couple, that just kind of gets forgotten sometimes. I think it's important. Yeah.
Just on the co-founder point, what advice would you give to somebody who actually needs to go out and seek a co-founder for their business? I mean, you mentioned earlier that your relationship with your then boyfriend potentially wasn't fortified enough when you started the business. A lot of policers now are actually trying to say that you need to go out and you need to find a tech founder or co-founder, for example, to look after the back end of the business. Otherwise, we would struggle to invest in your company. But that relationship almost right off the bat is quite manufactured and forced. So how would you go about actually going and finding a co-founder that both suits your skill set but also suits your business?
I think it's just different types of relationships, right? Because if you're going out there and you're seeking a co-founder, that's a completely professional relationship, and it's people do that every day in the job. They're kind of put to work with someone because that person has certain skill sets and that person has certain skill sets, and so you come together and you work it out. I think that's fine.
Do you think it needs to go deeper than that from the get-go?
No. I think you both need to know what you're trying to achieve. You've both got to have like the similar vision, and you've got to clearly define what each other's roles are and where you might cross over and who has the final say. And I think if you've got those points ironed out, then it's not necessarily like, I'm guessing you guys were friends before you started the podcast, right? I think it's possible as a kind of professional relationship.
Any advice as to where people can go to find co-founders? Anything you'd recommend?
No, sorry.
That's fair enough.
No, fair enough. Yeah,
Haven't a clue.
Yeah.
Better know than
fair enough.
Haven't tried it. Tinder, that worked for me.
I love that. Nice.
Good. I wanted to touch on something completely different as well. So Forbes 30 under 30, obviously an accolade that you have amongst many to your name.
Mm-hmm.
How did that come about? What
We
was
don't
the
pay
process?
for it, by the way.
Okay.
That is a common misconception.
Yeah.
We do not pay.
Yeah. Okay. I have heard that. It was good to clarify that. Yeah.
So guys, they pay.
Yeah. Yeah. Reading between the lines. Yeah, we know.
We don't pay.
Yeah.
It is someone nominates you, and our chairman nominated me. Mike Balfour, he started Fitness First. He nominated me, and
does he
there
have?
you go,
Is he
I'm
on the
list.
Forbes 30 under 30 himself,
No.
or
No, he's not on the list.
so there's a list of people who are allowed to nominate?
No, anyone can nominate anyone.
Oh, okay.
But I think because of who he is, like, it adds, I don't know.
Credence, yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was just me. Maybe I am actually
Just that
worthy
good.
of Forbes 30 under 30.
So how did that relationship come about then?
Good question. He was an angel investor,
Okay.
and our kind of first lead investor, and then came on as chairman. It was a cold email, but he had trained as an accountant as a teenager with my co-founder's dad, and so he kind of dropped that into the first line.
Okay.
You might remember Peter Symes, you trained together, etc. And maybe that made him open the email. Apparently that meant nothing.
Okay.
Apparently it was more just the fact that, so Fitness First, they rent, or they kind of put assets into a room and rent them out to you, is essentially what they do. And we put assets, put them into your home, rent them out to you. So he understood the business model.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there was also the kind of club element of subscriptions that he felt he really knew from his club days. And so it just felt like a natural business for him to get involved in.
I'm with you.
So yeah, he came on as an angel investor. We have a really good relationship with him. He was a great kind of mentor to have around.
Yeah, I bet.
Have there been any specific gems that he's dropped that you've sort of have stuck out to you?
Figure out what the problem is before you start trying to fix it. Like, actually get to the root of a problem, because I think a lot of the time people are like, oh no, I've got this problem, I'm going to go and fix it, but actually that's kind of superficial. If you kind of need to go down a few layers. He's actually got his 20 rules of business that I can't remember off the top of my head.
Right. A diligent student.
Yeah, fair enough.
Can you talk to going into pitches? Sort of what the experience has been for you going into pitches, and what kind of advice you give to people when it comes to raising funding? I think it's quite a daunting process for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I will be completely honest, I didn't do much of the pitching. I'm an uneducated female, young female from southeast London, and I did not suit those investor conversations really. So my co-founder did it. He's a privately educated male accountant who knows exactly what he's talking about. So I'd come in for the kind of second meetings or third meetings.
Do you have any regrets about not going into this?
Not really, because I was focused on the business. I was focused on the operations, the team, the customer service, the product that we were building. And fundraising is a full-time job. And that was basically his job, was fundraising and having all those conversations. And I would not have wanted to do that job at the time. I really enjoyed my job. And I don't regret it.
Have you played more part of the funding since?
I have. I think it's really difficult for like a solo founder to fundraise, because for us it was clear he does the fundraising, I'm working on the business, and they are both two very, very big jobs. If you've got one person trying to do it all, I feel so sorry for them, because it must just be so incredibly difficult to do that. And I think the process itself of raising capital can get easier. There's got to be a better way for businesses to do it on like both ends of the spectrum, investment firms and startups. There's got to be a better way. And there's a few. So there's a platform that tries to match VCs and startups. Maybe that's the future. There's obviously like Seeders and Crowdcube, where you can actually go out to the crowd. There's a few things popping up in that space. I'm not totally sure that we've completely cracked it yet.
Yeah, sure. Because I can see you're now on the other side of it. You're investing in business yourself.
Yes. Well, I'm doing a stint at a consumer VC/growth firm. So they invest in consumer focused businesses, fantastic brands that you will have known about. And yeah, so I'm kind of on the other side of the table, because for me it was such a daunting prospect, and I did feel in some conversations that I was not welcome, and I did not feel at home or at ease. A bit like this, joking.
That's 3 jokes. People are gonna think you're serious.
Yeah, and so I guess I think the best way to learn is by seeing it from someone else's perspective. And now I look at a lot of pitch decks and speak to a lot of founders, and I'm just kind of getting exposure to that side of things.
When you say you didn't feel welcome in a lot of situations, what do you mean by that exactly? Can you elaborate a little bit?
I don't think I fitted the idea of what a founder should be.
What did they think the idea of a founder should be?
Well, I risk getting a bit sexist here, but I think they expected me to be male, and there is actually there is research that shows that the conversations that an investor will ask a man is very different to the questions that they'll ask a woman. So they'll ask a male about vision, growth, the future. They will ask a female about the problems, and so naturally, the female is talking about all the problems, and the male is talking about
where it's going to go,
the space, Elon Musk type thing.
Yeah.
And there's research that shows that, and I think coming across pieces of research like that makes me feel a little bit more like it wasn't all just in my head, and that it is actually a thing. I think we have a lot of. This is not just investors versus founders. This is, as a society, we have a lot of biases that we maybe will overcome at some point, but I don't think we will in my lifetime.
That was going to be my next question. Are you an optimist or a pessimist on that?
I'm an optimistic pessimist.
So yes, but just on a longer time horizon kind of thing. Yeah.
Can you give any specific advice to females who are looking to raise money at the moment?
Know your numbers, which is advice I would give any founder. Be confident, and just know your business inside out. But also, I think women can be a little bit more shy or at unease with the accomplishments. So realize what you've done and how incredible what you've built is. Because if you don't realize that, no one else is going to realize it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is quite important. I think men, can have quite big egos compared to women. And then if a woman is confident, they're deemed to be too confident. So it's difficult to get to find the right level of confidence.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting topic of conversation. I'm actually curious to get your opinion, because it is quite a big topic of discussion at the moment, as I'm sure you're aware. The idea of, people are looking to make more of a conscious effort to hire women in certain positions and certain roles and industries and things like that. And obviously, when you consume mainstream media, you see two sides of the coin. You see one side of people going, we need to make more of an effort to include women in these spaces because they have historically been left out of them. And then you hear the other side of the coin of people saying, well, I'm not getting these advantages as a man when I'm going into the room. I've just worked hard, got the grades, got the degree, and I'm turning up to an interview. Why are they getting a handicap? And there's sort of two arguments that are always made. I'm curious to know what you think about that whole side of it.
Yeah, I think that people should be given a little bit more, not hand holding because that's kind of demeaning, but a little bit more support if they are a minority that doesn't fit within the current kind of status quo. I think they should be given more support. I find the kind of women only events and spaces quite difficult. I've always kind of worked in a male dominated industry, and I also just feel that sometimes having those kind of female only spaces don't help, because you have to deal with men in kind of everyday life, so you can't just surround yourself by women. I think you have to have a good mix, and it can be it can be difficult if you're only having conversations with women about anything, and then you kind of have to go off and speak to a man. They'll expect you to kind of act in a different way. You've kind of got to work out how you work together as opposed to each in silo.
How do you think, just kind of going on that point, how do you think your ego's changed over the course of running the business? Because I kind of noticed earlier when Ollie mentioned your many accolades, you felt a bit uncomfortable hearing about it, and then on the flip side to that, you mentioned that when you go into raise funding, you need to have the ability to have that confidence and sort of back yourself and promote it. So I'm curious to know how you think your ego's changed.
I have a lot of insecurities,
as do we all. I just don't think it gets talked about enough.
Yeah, I think I don't really know how I got to where I am, which sounds very strange, but yeah, I guess I kind of I almost feel like I'm in a dream sometimes. I'm not actually in real life, because I just stuck my head down for a few years, and I really did stick my head into kids' bikes for quite a while. And I don't know. I don't know who I am, why I'm here, how I got here half the time. And if I think about it too much, then I get quite confused at life generally. So I tend to just stick to what I'm good at. I think I realize what I'm good at and hone in on that a little bit more. And I do also have this kind of, with the public speaking that I do, and not right now, for some reason it hasn't turned on today, but I do have this switch that I kind of almost turn on, where I can just go up and do public speaking. If you knew me as a teenager, you would not believe that I'd be up on stages talking to crowds of 200 people plus.
Really?
Like, I was the shyest, most awkward teenager, and it doesn't make sense for me to be doing what I'm doing. But then I have also heard that some of the best public speakers, they are really shy, and I do, like, I switch. There's a switch that goes inside me, and then my body relaxes and I can do it. And I think, and maybe that's a piece of advice for people going into investment meetings. You've got to find your switch, because I think we do all have a switch where we can turn it off and on again.
Agreed.
Adrenaline seems to be mine, so realize I was an hour late here, which is totally not correct. But
they wouldn't have known that before you said that.
Building adrenaline into my life seems to help with
Yeah.
like turning on off and on that switch.
Yeah. I think you've got a really interesting quality that I haven't, you don't see very often, or you do, but not as often as maybe you should, which is that I've noticed that for a lot of this interview, whenever we've asked you a sort of maybe a bit of a deeper question or a more thought-provoking question, you take your time to answer.
I've noticed that.
And I think that's a really, really telling quality. It's a really admirable quality, because I think especially in the age of, or in this sector of entrepreneurialism, there is a lot of posturing and there is a lot of ego, and there is a lot of kind of like going to those meetings, you know, the need to feel like you've got all the answers. And so you can ask someone a question, they go, well, you know, I think it's sort of a thing where, you know, there's a lot of like stalling just to kind of make it seem like you got it together. But I like the fact that you've quite deeply considered everything that we've asked today. I think that's quite like a cool quality.
Well, I kind of have to. When I was a teenager, I had a terrible stutter, and I had hypnotherapy for my stutter. And sometimes it will come back, and I don't think people around me notice. I notice, and so I have to think about what I'm saying. So maybe it's not actually that I think about my words, it's just that if I didn't think about my words, I'd be
You had hypnotherapy for a stutter and it worked?
Hypnotherapy, yeah.
Hypnotherapy.
I don't remember. I had a few sessions, and then she kind of created this CD that I took home, and I'd listen to it when I fell asleep, or before a big day, or if I was particularly nervous, I'd listen to it and fall asleep. I still don't know what the end of the CD is about, because I'd always fall asleep at a certain point in it. I now don't know where that CD is, so I don't have that to fall back on, which I kind of wish I did have sometimes.
Yeah,
but I've built other mechanisms into my life.
Well, you haven't started today, and it's been an amazing conversation.
I've really enjoyed it.
Right before we end, we have a question that we ask everyone at the end of every interview, which is basically, obviously we're a practical podcast, we focus on the actionable. If you could give one piece of actionable, practical advice for someone who's looking to start a business or has already started one, what would you say?
Talk to someone about it, because I think people have these ideas, and they think that if I talk about my idea, someone's going to nick my idea. No one's going to nick your idea, and if they do, then they should have done it anyway. If you don't talk about your idea, then you don't get feedback, and feedback is so crucial to kind of padding out that idea. You might find a co-founder, you might find an advisor, you might find someone that is just like, oh, I'll do this for you and help you out with this. You might also just realize it's a really terrible idea and you shouldn't be doing it. But yeah, I think actually just talking about your idea is the very first step you can do into actually getting anywhere with it.
Amazing.
It's a good piece of advice.
Alex Rico-Lloyd, thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation.
It's been a really good
I don't know what you're worried about.
I don't feel like it's been reciprocated on that side of the mic.
I need a massage. I'm so tense.
Guys, we hope you enjoyed the episode. Remember to subscribe, turn on post notifications so you don't miss any more episodes. We've got lots of great interviews coming up. And if you're on streaming platforms, then please do rate 5 stars and leave a review. But for now, Alex, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.